Okay, so let's get going. Let's see what happens. I thought we'd start off by describing what's in Lightroom, what it's actually for, and then actually go into using bits of it. I've got two or three pictures from Ian, and I've got two or three sample pictures of my own, which we can use to actually demonstrate some of the facilities. So basically, up the top here, you can see the modules. Can you see my cursor okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Good. So the library module is in some ways, to me, one of the most important parts of Lightroom, because it completely duplicates either your Finder if you're on a Mac or your Internet Explorer if you're on a PC. So you've got down here exactly what is in your disk, all the folders, all the disks, and all the other bits and pieces. It's all there. And the great thing about it is that you can completely control your pictures from here. So you can load your pictures into a folder here. You can create a folder, rename a folder, move pictures between folders, all within Lightroom without touching either the Finder or Outlook, whatever it's called on a PC. I can't remember. What's it called on a PC?
I know what you mean. File manager.
File manager, that's it, yes, of course, yeah. So it completely duplicates what's on your computer. And therefore, you can control everything here. And that's important because it means that you don't have to worry about moving something or putting something in a folder on your computer and then remembering to do it in Lightroom. If you do it in Lightroom, it will automatically update your computer at the same time. So you've got a complete control over it. So that's the library module. Within the library module, you obviously have all the folders. This is my current catalog. And the way that Lightroom works is you have a catalog, and you can have multiple catalogs. This particular catalog I've got here has been running for about 2 years. But I've got another catalog before that. And also I've other catalogs I use for special situations. So for example, I've done a couple of weddings and things like that, and they're in their own separate catalog so they don't get mixed up. So the catalog is shown up here. I think you see in this particular one, I've got 11,441 pictures. Don't worry about the other bits. And this is my duplication of my computer. So in any folder, I've got all the pictures relative to that folder, and I can work on them and see how I work on from there. Okay, that's the library module. The develop module is the one that allows you to work with an individual picture, applying all the color corrections and other changes you want to do. And that's the one, obviously, we're going to spend most of the time on in this particular session. The map module is if your camera has GPS built into it and you have it turned on, the GPS information will be automatically imported into Lightroom. And that means you can automatically catalog where every picture is, right down to the precise latitude and longitude. Personally, I think it's an absolute waste of time. I've never used it. The main reason being that it has a massive drain on your camera battery, and I'd rather take photos than record GPS things. So that's a personal opinion. The book one is if you want to create a photo book. It's okay. It's not brilliant. If you're going to create a photo book, you're probably better off to go to whichever printer you're going to and download their software, which is more sophisticated than what's available in Lightroom. The slideshow one, again, you can create a slideshow from multiple folders if you want to, and you can actually manage your print from here. Now, and also you can manage web images from here. I personally do not use these last 5 at all, ever. I've never found any real use for them. I can find better ways to do these things. So I pretty much concentrate on the library module and the develop module. Okay, makes sense to everyone? Okay, so within each folder, you've got all the pictures, and let's just go to this one. Okay. This is one I recently took when I went to Brands Hatch a couple of weeks ago, and they're running American Car Festival. You load your pictures in there, and they just come in, and then it's just a list of all the pictures. The thumbnails, you can change the size from very small to very, very big, entirely up to you. It suits you. I tend to work usually with 4 pictures to view. Personal preference, nothing more than that. And then down here at the bottom, you can see what's known as a film strip. So you can actually click on individual pictures. Again, it's not something I tend to use, but it's there if you ever wanted to. So we've covered the left, we've covered the top, we've covered the bottom, and we've covered the right. So that basically is what's in Lightroom. Anybody got any questions at this point?
When you import, at the moment, I have to import my photos from the camera into the the Olympus software, because that's the way that it brings it onto the computer. Can I import it directly into Lightroom from the camera?
As far as I'm aware, you can. I mean, the images you sent me, I assume were imported through that software.
Yes.
Yeah, well, they load it straight to Lightroom without any problem. But I mean, I can't. It should be able to handle it. I can't see any reason why it shouldn't.
Okay. And I take JPEG and RAW, so will it load both images up?
Yep. If you want it to, yes. Okay, and you can separate them to separate folders if you want.
Okay.
Okay. Right. So we're going to add some pictures in, and I'm going to add in some of the pictures that Ian sent me. Now, these are already on my computer. If you're importing direct from the camera, you will go up to the file menu at the top, okay, and click on import photos and videos, okay, and then it will allow you to search your computer for, I don't know, cards, cameras, whatever you got plugged in, ignore that. But because I already got these built on, copied onto my computer, all I have to do is just add the folder into my list of folders. And here's my folders, and if I click on the plus sign and say add a folder, okay, and in here I have got Ian's files. Say choose, and it will pick up all the files that are in that folder. It then puts a tick by each one saying, do I actually want to import this picture? If you don't mind, Ian, I'm not going to bother with that one.
No, that was one I sent you a replacement for that one.
Yeah. They're not.
I did say I didn't do people photos.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've got those people who do that. So I've chosen those 4 to import. Now, over on the right hand here, it's got the handling. So it says, firstly, do I want to build smart previews? Well, actually, no. It says, do I want to build previews? What happens is when you import the images into Lightroom, it builds a preview file because it's never actually working on the original file. Your original file stays completely virginal. It never gets changed. But you build the preview, and the system uses the preview for you to make all the changes. And it's only when you finally export the image that it uses the information from the preview, but your original file will always be there in its absolute original state. And that's a great benefit because it means you can go back to it and do all sorts of things with it, do other ways of handling it. Okay. Smart previews, I'm not going to bother to explain this. It's just it's not something that's really much use unless you're a real professional in all sorts of things. Don't import suspected duplicates. Well, that's fine. If it finds 2 pictures in the folder which are basically the same, it'll do that. Add to collection, I'm going to explain a bit later. I won't worry about that. During the input, you can apply certain settings. You could create these yourselves. All right. These are all sorts of ones that I've created. Some I've created, some are standard. I don't really tend to do that. I prefer to work on each one individually. And then I've added in my own copyright message. So when I import images, it puts my copyright stamp into the metadata of the file. So it's always there right from the word go. Okay. And the final thing in here is keywords. You can assign as many keywords as you like to your pictures. You can assign them to a folder, to the group, to all of them, to individuals, whatever. I find keywords an amazingly useful thing when you want to try and find something. You know, I've got what, 11,500 pictures in this calendar, this catalog, and sometimes remembering where things are is a bit difficult. But if I put in the keyword, then it'll do that. So if I put in a keyword for this one of Ian, right, all these pictures will automatically have that tag. So at any time, I can always go and find all pictures done by Ian, and they'll come up. Okay. And then all I need to do is say import. And hey presto, there they are, bang, they're in. And at the top here, you'll see it's building the previews as we go along. And it won't take too long to do this. That's it, it's done.
Can I
So
ask a question?
yeah.
Is it making a second copy of the file then?
No, it's not making a copy of the file at all. This is a subsidiary file, which is usually a couple of 100K rather than 50, 60, 70 meg, whatever your file is.
Right.
It's a minute file which contains all the instructions. Okay. So okay. So just double clicking on a picture will allow you to bring it up to full size. Here's the next one, here's the next one, here's the next one. Okay. So we've got a picture here, we can start working on it. You'll see straight away that it's incorporated the keyword. We know that straight away. If it was me doing this and I'd taken other pictures of Tate Britain, I might put in keywords of Tate or London or anything like that. And you can put as many keywords as you like. And you can actually have keyword suggestions come up for you. You can build your own lists of keywords so you don't have to type them all in. And you just say, use the landscape keywords, you know, and it'll do that automatically. Okay. So keyword is very useful. Right, so now we're in the library module, which is the basic thing. And in here, you can do some basic things with it. Again, I tend not to because they're a bit crude. You've got far more control in the develop module, but I'll just explain what everything is. Firstly, one of the most important displays you've got is this histogram. All right. For those of you not totally familiar with the histograms, what it's showing is, firstly, it shows me the ISO this was shot at, the length, the aperture, and the speed of the shutter. So I've got all the technical information about that. On the left-hand side, effectively is black. On the right-hand side, effectively is white. Okay, and in the middle, obviously, is the midtones. So what you want to try and achieve, if you can, with a picture, is a full balance across there, so that you've got a well-balanced picture, which has got a high dynamic range, picks up most of the images. Now, the disadvantage of working with a JPEG file is that it's already processed most of the information out of it. So everything at the extreme ends will probably have been processed out already, and therefore it's irrecoverable. But if you're working with a raw file, you can always potentially recover everything. Okay, so that's the histogram, and we'll look a lot more at that as we go along. Then you've got the quick develop module. Again, I tend not to use this because it's a bit crude. So for example, you can move the exposure up a full stop, down a full stop, up a third of a stop, down a third of a stop. All right. But you've got much better control within the develop module. The keywording, or seeing the keyword list, you can add in comments if you build that into your camera as well. Okay, so I mean that's not supported yet. So let's go straight to the develop module. Okay, and effectively what we've got in this top section, the basic section, is the super sophisticated version of what's in the quick develop in the library module. And I'm just going to collapse it for a second. You've got 9 basic sections. Okay. The basic one, as we've said, automatically allows you to control the temperature, the exposure, the contrast, highlights, whites, blacks, and things like that. The tone curve, I'm not going to talk about tonight. We'll leave that. HSL, you control individual colors in terms of their saturation and luminance, and we'll do a little bit of that later on. Detail allows you to add in sharpening, and also a fairly new thing in the latest version of Lightroom is they've got a denoise AI. Okay, and I'll talk about that again as we go along a bit further. That's the detail tab. Lens corrections are quite fascinating. You notice I didn't actually tell it anything about these images in, did I? But it knows it was shot with the Olympus. It knows what lens you used. All right, and it's all automatically corrected for that lens profile. So any distortion that would have been created by the lens has already been dealt with within the lens profile, and it does that automatically. Transform, we're definitely going to have a look at in this picture, so I'll come back to that in a second. Effects is basically very simple. You can put a vignette on, or you can add grain to a picture. Again, it's not something I tend to use. Calibration is a wonderful thing, but beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight, so just we won't mention it. You'll notice as I open one and then click on another, it automatically closes the previous one. Okay, you don't have to have it that way, but I just find if you leave them all open, this gets very cluttered. So it works out. So anyway, let's look at this photo and say, what can we do with this photo? What would we want to do? Well, the first thing we can see is definitely a bit skew width, yeah? And really what we want is proper verticals, unlike the converging verticals of the scavenger hunt. So we want to see if we correct that, and that's all done within the transform module. Now there's a variety of ways of doing this. You can do it totally manually, you can adjust it vertically, okay, horizontally, you can rotate it, so on and so forth. But you've also got an auto function, a guided function, horizontal, what you call level, verticals, and a full one. And the full one, what you often need to do when you've got a picture which needs this sort of correction is you might need to look at one or two. This one is quite extreme. So I would probably look at the vertical one first. And yeah, that's definitely not very helpful, is it? It looks pretty awful. So I'd probably go to the full one. And that's actually, I think, done a pretty good job. We've got some very straight verticals. We've got some straight horizontals. It's obviously had to crop out a little bit of the image there. And we'll look how we can deal with that a bit later on. But it's made a very good correction, and I hope you would agree. Having done that, let's go back to our basic menu. What can we say about this image? Well, perhaps the exposure might be a little bit bright. Obviously, the sky is blown out. And we all know that a camera lies because the sensor, not the sensor, the exposure metering is obviously going to look at the whole image unless you're doing spot metering. So obviously it's got the exposure for the building probably near enough right, but obviously the sky is virtually blown out. So we might want to think about bringing the exposure down a fraction. Now, the thing about this particular set of corrections here is these are global corrections. Whatever I do is going to affect the whole picture. And there are going to be cases where you want to affect the whole picture, but also where you only want to affect part of the picture. So let's look at the way the things can work out when we're doing the whole picture. You'll notice also that it's got a profile built in. Now, there are standard profiles from Adobe, but because it recognizes your camera, Ian, it's already figured out that's what we should be right one for your camera. Okay, so if we click on this auto button here, it's going to try and look at the picture using artificial intelligence, that wonderful thing, AI, and figure out what exposure it needs, how much contrast, how we should adjust the highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, and so on and so forth. And all you need to do is click on auto. And it's made a bit of a change. So zoom, of course, is not the most precise thing for portraying images. So, sorry, that's how we started. That's how we are at the moment. Okay. And that, of course, is after the correction for the verticals and the horizontals and with the auto adjustment. So on the whole, I think it's done a pretty good job in the building. What I would say, if I was doing this, and again, you know, obviously, I'm putting my interpretation on your photos. So it might be totally different to what you think would be happening. But I'd want to probably lift the shadows areas a little bit because there's some detail in there which I can't see. And I definitely want to deal with the sky. Okay, so you can see it's brought down the highlights. Let's bring the histogram back. Okay, pushed up the shadows a bit, changed the whites and blacks. Now, you'll also notice the histogram is butting up at the end on the black side, and it's missing out on the right side. So it's not got 100% of that thing covered. And you're not always going to be achieving that, but it's always worth trying. And the way to do that is by adjusting the whites and blacks sliders. Now, the interesting thing is if you hold down your Alt key on a PC or Alt on a Mac, no, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac, and then as you slide it, the picture will disappear. And as I slide it up, you'll see bits of white start to appear. And that means I've taken it too far. Those areas are completely blown out. So we need to draw it back slowly until that completely disappears. Similarly with the blacks, all right? All those pictures, bits which have been colored in, are now going to be completely filled in. They're solid. So we need to draw those back. I like to leave just a hint of solid black in, probably about there. A bit more, about there. Okay. Has that made a massive difference? No, probably not. But again, if you look at the histogram, we're just butting up the left and only just over butting up on the blacks. So we've got a more balanced picture. We've got a wide dynamic range. What else would I do with this picture? I think, well, as I said, I'd want to try perhaps increase the shadow detail in there and in there. But most importantly, I want to get some detail in the sky because that sky is it's better than it was, but it needs a bit more. And this is where you start working on local adjustments rather than global adjustments. And to do a local adjustment, you have to use a mask. Now, the masking in Lightroom is now very, very sophisticated and very fast. And you click on this little icon here, which is that, and it says, what do you want to do? Do you want to click on the subject, the sky, the background, or some other things? And we'll look at these as we go through other things. I obviously want to check the sky. So it's going to look at that and it's going to check the sky. And you see it's selected it pretty well. Okay, it's just put that color overlay on it. And as soon as I adjust it, I want to perhaps bring the exposure down a little bit. Maybe knock the highlights out a little bit. Add a bit of contrast. And that, I think, is a pretty reasonable sky. How's that compared to what you remember, Ian?
My memory's not that good.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
At least it wasn't raining. That's all I remember.
Yeah. But I remember all we've done is bring out the detail that's in the raw data.
Yeah.
Right. We haven't put in a fake sky. We haven't done a sky replacement. We've just brought out the details in there. Okay. And now I'm going to create a new mask, and I want to do it for this area here, which I think has got some detail in, which was missing out. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to create a new mask, and this time I'm going to use the brush. Okay, and the brush, you can see, can you see it there? Okay, yeah, you can adjust the size in a variety of ways, which I won't go into at this moment. Well, actually, I can. It's using the left and right bracket keys, the square brackets, just to the right of the letter P. So if you push the left-hand bracket, it makes it smaller. Push the right-hand bracket, it makes it bigger. You can also change how much feathering there's got in there. So if I push the feathering up, you'll see there's a circle within a circle. And the circle, the outer circle is where the feathering's happening. So I'm just going to paint in there, make my brush a bit smaller, paint in there, and paint in there. Okay, so that's going to be my mask. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the shadows up for those areas. And I think that looks pretty reasonable. I don't know what you think. All right. And then I'm going to create a new mask. Again, I'm going to use the brush. And I'm going to come down here with that door and that door. You don't have to be too precise with these brushes, which is one of the great things about it. And again, I'm going to bring the shadows up just to give out a little more detail on that door. And I think that's a pretty reasonable result. Don't know what you think, but it's done very quickly without an awful lot of effort. Now, the only other thing that's relevant here is this bit here. So you can cut and paste in there. You've got the facility in here with these tools here. They're not brilliant. Make my brush a bit bigger. Right. Yeah, it's not really going to do anything. But if you use the the clone tool, which is the same as the clone tool, obviously in Photoshop, you can pick an area and paint across, and it's not very effective. And really, this is not what Lightroom's for. Okay, you're better off doing that in Photoshop, especially with Photoshop Beta and the generative fill. Or of course, you could just crop it down and get rid of that bit altogether. But you know, in terms of the main picture, I think that works out pretty well. Any questions before I move on to the next picture? Right, okay. So let's move to the next picture. I'm going to show you one of the features of Lightroom, which I think is just brilliant. And it's what's known as a virtual copy. Because what I want to do with this picture is I want to create two versions of it. I want to create one that's very highly colored, and I want to create a very contrasty black and white one. Now, normally, of course, that will require two files, but in Lightroom, you don't do that. If you right-click on the picture, there's a facility here called Create a Virtual Copy. And all of a sudden, you'll notice I've got two versions down here. And that one's got like a little fold in the bottom. That means it's a copy. It hasn't created an additional file. It is only virtually there in Lightroom. So you haven't all of a sudden got two files. You still only got one file, but you can treat the same file in different ways, which is a very handy thing to be able to do sometimes. Let's go back to this one. So we'll do the same thing. We're in the develop module. We're going to it's picked up a different profile for this one for you, Ian, interestingly enough. And I'm going to hit the auto button, and I think that's giving it a nice bit of color. It was a little bit flat.
That's probably because it was shot on a different lens. The other was a pro lens and this one wasn't.
Yeah. Do that. I meant to go to the lens correction. Yeah, you see, I haven't picked up this lens, so it hasn't got the details of this lens.
No.
So you could say, what make was it?
It was an Olympus.
You see, it hasn't got the Olympus lens it's built in.
No.
Well, you have to get a decent camera, what can I say? Right, okay, so let's do that. Yeah, this is nice. It's a bit overcolored. So maybe I would bring the saturation down a little bit, because I think it is just a little bit too overcolored. And also I'm going to use a thing called clarity. And again, remember, I'm working globally on the whole picture. Clarity is a way of dealing with contrast, which is slightly different. It ignores certain things, and it just gives a tiny little bit more level of sharpness. Nothing very dramatic, but there we are. You may not even see the difference on zoom. But what I do want to do is I want to make this animal stand out. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my masking, and I'm going to do several things. Firstly, I think this up the top here is too bright. So I'm going to darken that down by using what's known as a linear gradient. And all I do is just draw down there. And the gradient's going to be most effective at the top and least effective down there. It's going to gradually fade out. So I can go into my exposure and I can bring it down. Not dramatically, I think that's probably enough. Again, so you can see the difference. It's just affecting that part. I'm going to create a new mask and I say select the subject. Now, obviously it's recognized that these are part of the subject as well, but so no problem. We can actually subtract them using the brush. Just get rid of that bit, get rid of that bit. Okay, so it's just concentrating on our animal. And what I'm going to do is actually push the exposure up a little bit. Increase the shadows a little bit. And also give it a little bit of clarity. And again, all we've done is affected that animal. And I think that's not a bad result. We've got a few clicks. Okay. But now let's take the same picture, go back to our original. Okay. and turn it into a black and white. Now, when you go into black and white, you've got a whole series of color profiles you can try. And all you have to do is just mouse over them. You don't need to click to see the different results. So you find one you might like. Yeah, I quite like that one. Okay. Close that down. So we've got a nice black and white. Right, I want to really play around with the contrast in this one. Okay. I'm going to again go into my shadows, put in my mask, put in a little gradient at the top. Okay, and bring that exposure down. I'm going to put another linear gradient at the bottom and bring my exposure up. Okay, and then I'm going to go to create another new mask, and I'm going to select the subject again. Okay, again, I'm going to subtract using my brush the bits I don't want it to include. Okay, and I'm going to make that again very contrasty, bring up the exposure a bit. Okay, I'm going to add another mask, and I'm going to add a radial gradient this time. Radial gradients are great. All right, I just want to concentrate on this part of the animal. Okay, and again, bring my exposure up a little bit, make it stand out a bit more. And hey presto, we've got two versions of the same picture. Oh. But we still only got one original file, which is not bad going. Okay. I'm going to look at some of the demo shots I've used with other people, which I think can be very handy. This is a shot I took in Bruges. Again, I had this massive problem with the sky, but I'm just going to do my auto correction. And it's helped bring out a little bit of the sky. But again, I'm going to want to go into my sky, perhaps bring that exposure down a little bit, add a bit of contrast in, a little bit of saturation maybe, and that's probably close to what it is. This area here, I've lost all the detail, so I'm going to add another mask. I'm going to use my brush again, and I just want to brush over this bit, this bit, and this bit. And again, I'm going to bring my shadows up. And you know, that's quite a dramatic change. Sorry. And just a couple of quick clicks. Now, obviously, if I was preparing this for a competition, I'd do a lot more work on it, but the object, I think, is just to show you a little bit of what's involved in this. This was a simply awful picture I took. Look at that histogram. It really is bad. It was a foggy, misty day, and I was thinking, this is Marseille trying to pretend it's Hollywood. I'm failing miserably. So first thing I'll do, click on my auto, give me a bit more, it's still there. Go to my whites, hold down my option key. Right, that's where it blows out. Go to my blacks. That's where that blows out. Bring down my highlights a bit. I'm going to work on the sky in a second. So, okay, let's select the sky. Okay, let's bring that exposure down. It was a pretty grey day. One of the things that can be very useful sometimes is a dehaze button. You have to be a little bit gentle with it. It's making the sky a bit better, but it was a pretty awful sky to start with. This area here is now too bright, and this area here is too dark, in my opinion. So let's create a new mask, and again, choose our brush. I'll make it a bit bigger. Yeah, just brush over this bit here. And we want to decrease the exposure a little bit, add up the contrast a little bit, and put a bit of clarity in there. And then we're going to add another new mask, and I'll put in a linear gradient here, going up, oops, going up from the bottom. And I want to make that a bit lighter. So exposure. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to do with this is this green area is pretty awful. And I want to do something with that. So I'm going to go into the HSL color bit. Okay. And I'm going to look at my greens. Okay. And I'm just going to increase the saturation on the greens and the luminance. There's the yellows. It's a pretty hopeless photograph, isn't it? Okay. What I want to do is this area here. I want to get some more green into it because it's pretty awful. So let's go back to our mask. That's the mask. I don't need to recreate it. And let's make the tint a little bit stronger. Don't want to go too wild, but that's a bit better, isn't it? Yeah. So we've gone from that to that. It's never going to be a great photo, but at least it's perhaps suitable as a holiday snap. Tower Bridge. This is a classic one. Now, this is interesting. This is shot at 2800 ISO. If I blow it up, there is a bit of noise in there. You can see, not a lot because my lens is pretty good, but it might be a good idea to try denoising this a little bit. All right. Now, this is using the automatic denoise built into Lightroom. It's pretty good, but not brilliant. All right. I'll show you why for a couple of reasons. So that's before, that's the art. Right. And it automatically does it 100%. So you can dial it back a bit if you want. But here's the problem. If I say enhance, what it's actually going to do, it's actually going to create a duplicate file. And it takes a bit of time to do it, but we'll do it anyway. I'll click on enhance. You'll see up here, it says creating a DNG using denoise. So effectively, it's going to create another version of this file. It's not the workflow I tend to use, but it can work. Ian, I know you bought Denoise AI, and it's what I use. So with a picture like this, I tend to take these into denoise first while they're still raw images. Do that to remove the noise, and then import them into Lightroom afterwards. That's just the way I prefer to work. As you can see, I mean, I've got a reasonably fast computer, but this is taking a bit of time. Denoise is 10 times faster. So I'm not a great fan of it. It doesn't achieve quite the level that I want it to. But we'll let it finish now. It started, as the saying goes. Right. So you see, I've now got two versions of the file. That's the first one with the noise in it. I don't know how visible it is on Zoom, but here there is a significant difference. So, firstly, we got rid of the noise. Secondly, if we look at the basic information here, it says the white balance is as shot, and I didn't adjust my white balance, and I should have done because it was set for daylight. But because it's a raw file, we can change the white balance because this is tungsten lighting. So all I would need to do is, well, there's two things. I could actually say use tungsten lighting, and you get a much more natural picture. I personally think it's a bit too much, so I do it custom-wise and bring it up just a tad, and that's a much more natural picture than the other way of doing it. Now we can click on the auto button, brighten things up, and I think that's a pretty reasonable picture of that machine. Now, what I've done with this picture, there they are, Rebecca, see? Stuck in the background, that was our guide. Is I've removed the people from it in Photoshop, and I'll show you how I did that in a minute. And I've also removed the screen, and actually allowed to have a fairly good picture of the whole machine, which I thought worked quite well. Also, because I did run it at a reasonable f-stop, I've got lovely starbursts coming out of the lights, which I was quite pleased about. So that's that one. This is Henny Regatta. It's got a good spread on there, but it's actually a bit unbalanced. I really need to bring this guy out. And this is another classic case for using, you see, I've already done the auto adjustments down here. Let's use this, and we're going to create, ask it to choose the subject. And it's basically chosen him. Right, let's subtract using the brush. Just get rid of, this guy at the back, this guy here. So it does a pretty reasonable selection. But there's a better way of doing it. So what we're going to actually do is delete that mask and create again. And you look here, it's actually identified people in the picture. So if I just want to select that person, I click on that. Now I've got a series of options here, which are quite interesting. I can work on the entire person. I can work on his facial skin, his body skin, his eyebrows, his eye sclera, which are the whites, the irises, his lips, his hair, his clothes. I can choose all the things. I'm going to work on the entire person and create a mask. And I'm going to lift the exposure and lift the shadows. Okay. And then I'm going to create another new mask. Again, selecting the people, selecting the same person. And I'm going to choose the facial skin, create a mask. And I'm going to push that exposure up a bit more to light up his face. So that's gone from that to that. Now, for me, that's a very fast and easy way of making corrections within a picture. And I really quite like it. And the last one I'm going to look at before I go into some of the other things is this one. This is a model. Obviously, this is going to be cropped out when I get right to a file image. But I wanted to do something with a face. Now, the interesting thing about working on a face is we could paint all these out. I'm actually against that because this is natural skin, right? The only blemish I might actually get rid of is that one just under the lips, okay? But the rest of the facial skin, I think that's her natural skin, and I think it actually deserves to stay there. So I'm not going to adjust that. But what I am going to do is just click on there, choose this little brush, make it a lot smaller, just like a little healing brush, and just click over that bit. And that's gone. So it's very similar to the healing brush in Photoshop, but not as good as the remove brush in Photoshop. But I do want to work on our eyes. I think the eyes could be sharper. The much more detail could go into the irises. And we can do that in Photoshop. So let's go back there, choose the people, it's detecting people. There she is. All right. And I can say, let's look at her eyes clearer and her eyes and pupil. Well, let's look at the iris and pupil first. Create a mask. Lighten them up just a tad and add a bit of clarity in there. Okay. I think that works quite nicely. So listen, this is a very quick run through on Lightroom, sorry. But now what I want to do is take it into the other things that you can do with it, which make it very, very useful. Now, I know that Jeanette in particular is a very skilled Photoshop user. And there are things that you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in Lightroom. Lightroom is basically the photographer's package. It allows you to catalog your images, allows you to make the basic adjustments. It's not built in with all the weird and wonderful filters that you find in Photoshop. It's not built for compositing. It doesn't have layers. That's not what it's for. It's basically to get your picture looking the way you want it to look, and then take it in somewhere else if you want to. So, for example, with, hold on. Just give me 1 second.
Can I ask a question, John?
Please do, Rebecca.
Yeah. I'm very new to software packages, but when you do all the corrections, does that then save with that photograph? And does it, and my second question, does it make the file any bigger?
No, the original file always stays untouched.
Oh, okay.
It always stays untouched. This is what they call a sidecar file.
Right.
So it stores it in another place. It's very small. The sidecar file, sometimes 100, 200K compared to, I don't know, 30, 40 megabyte for your file from your camera.
Okay.
But it's all the information is contained in there. Your original file is totally untouched.
All right. Thank you.
Right. So let's go back to this picture. Okay. If I right click on it and get edit in, so I can edit in Photoshop. I'm actually going to edit the Photoshop beta. All right. Now I'm going to have to stop sharing and restart. Just give me 1 second. So here we are in Photoshop beta. Okay. And what you've got, of course, is the generative fill, which is the most wonderful thing. Now, there's going to be an awful lot of discussion about this whole AI matter. It really is a subject which is going to go on for, I think, a long time. But from my way of thinking, if you're using AI for something that you could have done using other steps, then that, I think, is reasonable. So, for example, to remove this bit here from this image from our guide, I can do that quite easily in ordinary Photoshop thing. It'll take a bit of time, but with a clone stamp and the other things that you've got within Photoshop, some of which are AI as well, you could do it. But it just so happens that just by bringing around it there and say do a generative fill, all right, now you can see this little bar. It actually is communicating with the Adobe servers, because the power that's required here is beyond most desktop or laptop computers. So it takes a few seconds, but it's done a pretty reasonable job. I think you'll agree. So let's come over here. Let's get rid of these people over here. Generative fill, generate. Sorry, Rebecca, I'm cutting you out of the picture.
That would have been quite hard to do manually.
It would have taken a fair bit of
On the
time.
left, yeah.
Right. So when it does this with the generative fill, by the way, it creates 3 versions. So you can look at all 3 versions to figure out which one you prefer. I think I prefer that version. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this screen. Generative fill, generate. And this would have taken forever in Photoshop using other methods, but you could do it. It is possible.
What would you fill it with, though?
It'd take a lot of time. How about that?
That's not bad. Not bad at all.
Don't like that version. No, I prefer the first version. I think I prefer that version. So it's done a really quite incredible job. And then all I do when I finish, I just click on save. Okay, and we'll close it down. I'll just stop my sharing again and go back to sharing Lightroom. All right. And now you see I've got both versions. It's automatically updated into Lightroom. So now I have got two files. Okay. But it's actually put the file back in the right folder, and it's updated the catalog completely with both images. And that to me is one of the great things about Lightroom, is the fact that you can control exactly where your images are. I mean, I don't know if you've had the same problems I've had in the past, is I've created images, where the bloody hell did I put it? I know it's somewhere, but if I've got it in here, and I've got it catalogued, and I've got my keywords, so for example here, I just use Tower Bridge as my keywords here, okay? What you can do in the library module, the grid mode. Right, I'm just playing around. I've had this problem before. When you're in Zoom, it's actually hiding part of this behind the share bit, and I can't get at it. So there it is. Right. So you can see here, you can search on text and attribute metadata. So if I took in text and I say anything containing the words Tower Bridge, and hey presto, it's found all my Tower Bridge images. Right off. And hey presto, there's the ones we just worked on. Okay. You'll see that I've got some with a color on, and some you'll notice here and there. I don't know if I've got it on this clip from it. I've categorized in other ways. So let's just look at that, and I'll see. Let's just go to another folder. When you bring in your images, if you're like me, you take a lot more images than you want. So sometimes you're going to say, oh, I want to keep that one, I want to get rid of that one. So for example, if I look at these two images, that one I think is quite good. That one I think is not. I don't like it. So all I have to do is if I press my X key, you see it's got a little black flag against it. Similarly with that one, I don't like that one. Let's get that. Don't like that one. Don't like that one. Don't like any of those. Okay. Don't like those ones. You can see that it's just putting this little black flag in each one. Now I can see on my attribute, show me all the ones with the black flags. And it shows me all the pictures I've rejected. All right. I can show me all the ones which have got no flags. And then all my rejected pictures are hidden. So when you're editing pictures from a shoot, you know, when you go out and do some, you can actually get rid of the ones you don't want very quickly. They're still on the file. I haven't got rid of them. Okay, no filter. So you'll see that they're there, but they're grayed out because I've X'd them. But if I click there, I can bring it back. So it's just a way of sort of culling your pictures. If you actually decide you don't want a picture or whatever forever, you can actually say, well, with this one, I can say, remove the photo. And it gives me the choice. Do I want to remove it from Lightroom, or do I actually want to delete the whole thing from the disk? So it's again, it's a good way of controlling your contents on there. Right? Once I've got rid of the ones I don't like, so we'll assume I've finished that. So show me all the ones with no flag, okay? I can then look at each picture and say, well, do you know what? That's okay, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay. I'm not being very discerning about this at all. I'm going to say, you can see I took an awful lot of pictures. Oh, I really like that picture. Don't know why, but I've decided I really like that picture. I can give it a star rating from 1 to 5. Okay, so I say, that's not bad. I'm going to give it a 3 star. And I quite like that one. I'm going to give that one a 3 star. And I quite like, oh, these are great. I like this one. I'm going to give that one a 3 star. And what you decide 3 star stands for is up to you. The way I've decided to do it is if I give something 3 star, I think it's a picture which has got some potential and I want to work on it further. And I'm not going to waste my time working on ones that are not. So now I can say, show me all the images which have got 3 stars. And they're the ones I want to work with. The others are still there. I'm just making sure I work on the ones that really matter. So I might say, oh, do you know what? I like this one, but this is the one I really like. Make it stand out. I'm going to make it, give it a red border. Right. So again, if I go back and get rid of all my attributes and all my stars, right, I can look through, and if I've got any highlighted in red, hey presto, they stand out to me straight away. So it's just a way of categorizing your pictures of ones you want to work on and the ones you don't. Okay, make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Right. Okay. Last thing I think before I take up the whole of your evening is, as most of you know, I'm a bit of a lunatic about this stuff. So I've got Lightroom, I've got Photoshop, I've got Luminar Neo, I've got ON1, I've got Topaz, and I use them all because not one of them is perfect at everything. For me, my particular workflow is one of two things. I either start, if I take a lot of pictures with a very high ISO, I shove them into Topaz Denoise AI first, because it is brilliant at getting rid of noise. I'm not going to show you that. It's done now. It's not relevant to the evening. Okay. Once I've done that, I bring all my images into Lightroom. I have the folder set up. I go through, I choose the ones I want to work on. If I've got any real duds, I'll get rid of them. I'll black check some others, which I think may be okay. I'll 3-star some. I might find one which is outstanding right from the word go and give it a 4 or 5 star. That's just the way I potentially tend to work. I then go into my develop module. I play around with all the things I think that Lightroom does very well. But hey presto, all of a sudden I come across something which I think, do you know what? This will work better in Luminar, or this will work better in Neo. Okay. And you know, it's just amazing how that can happen. So for example, let's go back to those demo files and take this young lady here. I'm going to reset it how back she was. And I'm going to export that into Luminar Neo. Right. So it's upgrading one first to Luminar Neo. Once that's done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to again stop sharing and go into share screen, Luminar Neo. So now I'm in Luminar Neo. So it's the same picture, it's brought it in straight away. But the great thing about it is if I go into the edit module, what I really love about Luminar Neo is the way it handles the portrait side. So let's just blow this picture up a bit. Okay, and let's look at the face. I love adding a tiny bit of face light in just to make it stand out, right? Before and after. I'm going to overdo this so it shows up more on Zoom. Okay, a bit of face light. On the eyes, I could do you know what? I'm going to change the color. I wanted to have blue eyes. How about that? Okay. I'm going to make the eyes a little bit whiter. I'm going to enhance them a bit. Get rid of a bit of dark circling. Okay. And it does it so much better than either Lightroom or Photoshop does. And there are other tools within Luminar which will work very well. If you see a tool with AI by the side of it, it really does mean it uses artificial intelligence. So one of my favorites is this accent one. All right. The accent one looks at all sorts of different things and decides whether it wants to make any difference to it. And you can, you know, the great thing about it, you just play around with it and see what you like. And I like it about there. Structure is a fascinating thing. You can add a lot of sharpness and structure to things. All right. And not a lot in this picture you could do it with. So it's probably not really relevant. The black and white module is pretty good. Relight is very fascinating. Again, this is the wrong picture. With relight, you can make the objects nearer to the camera brighter, and the objects in the distance you can make darker, and then you can change how they're affected. Not really relevant in this picture again, but it's a very, very powerful thing. So I might make the darker, make it a bit too bright, and I can change what point it affects. Probably out there. It's a very clever facility. Atmosphere, you can add fogs and mists and, you know, just a little bit. Okay. This made a difference in the background. And you've got so many other tools down here. The portrait bokeh is very clever. You can actually isolate the subject and put the background into out of focus. Now, it already is out of focus in this one, so it'd be pretty pointless. It does work quite well, and you have to be a little bit careful with it because you can get haloing effects out of it. So you see, it's picked up the subject perfectly. Didn't have to do anything. And then I can change, sorry, that side, the amount of the bokeh in the background, make it more or less blurred. So again, when you're finished, you just click on apply, and it does exactly the same as Photoshop does. It resaves the file, it saves it as a duplicate, automatically puts it back into Lightroom in the right folder, so it's all cataloged for you without having to think about it. So I'm going to share screen. Yeah. So again, we've got the two versions. So we just blow up. That's for the brown eyes. That's for the blue eyes. And it's just nice that you can work the two together. Now, the final thing I'm going to say, unless there's anyone, I'm sure there are questions around there, is my absolute package I love more than anything else is Luminar Neo. And the reason I love it is you can achieve things very, very quickly without having to spend the time that you need to do in Lightroom. Lightroom does a lot of them better, but with an awful lot of pictures, I do most of my work in Neo. Because the artificial intelligence built into Luminar Neo does some really clever things, and it does them very, very well on the whole. It's an incredibly simple package to use. Lightroom is a more complicated package to use. You have to use it and play with it for a little bit of time. But once you get used to it, it all becomes fairly self-evident. But Luminar Neo is wonderful. OM1, which I've also got, is incredibly clever, but it has a weird workflow. And much as I've achieved some things with it which are quite good, it's the last choice I go to. So all these packages I've got on an annual basis. When OM1 comes up for a renewal, I will not renew it. It's got some good things in it, but I can achieve them in Photoshop, Lightroom, and Neo without having to have OM1. It is very clever, and some of its masking is quite ingenious, but I can achieve it other ways, and the workflow is contradictory to all the other packages. I think is the best way to put it. So that's that's my basic introduction to Lightroom. It's covered an awful lot of things in a very, very short time. I would strongly recommend, if you haven't got it, get it. You can download it from Adobe completely free of charge for 7 days and use it. And at the end of 7 days, you can just ditch it. It has no limitations, doesn't put anything thing in the files. You can use it in 100% of its extent, every aspect of it, for 7 days free of charge. And if you're interested in it, I strongly recommend you do, because it costs you nothing to try. And you can achieve some very clever things in it. So, questions from anyone?
Yeah, I've got one, John. So all on the screen that we're looking at now, you've got all those images of the several ones of an individual picture. And as you said, it hasn't changed the original photograph at all. But you haven't. Do you need to save these ones, or does it automatically now save them in the program, even if you don't export them?
It's only what remember, everything that's been done has been done in this sidecar file, right? So it hasn't changed the picture. If I wanted to send this out to print or send it to a competition as a JPEG, I would have to export it.
Yes, but if you just want to leave it and think about it for 24 hours, when you reopen the program and come back to this image, they're all still there, are they?
So here's quit. I've quit the program. Okay.
Right.
Right. I shall now restart it. Lightroom. I'll have to reshare it again, of course. Share screen. Lightroom. Hey, president.
Okay.
So yeah, it's done all those things, and they're all stored in that sidecar file. Your original file. I mean, if you go into the history here, if I go back to that original picture, you can see all the things I did on that image.
Okay.
All right, and I can rig it to any state of it. All right. Okay. That's the point I got to Luminar. But if I hit on reset, it would go right and get rid of everything in the sidecar file and start again from scratch if I wanted to.
Right. Okay.
Is it constantly saving bits then to this sidecar file, because it has to save a file of the information somewhere?
Yes, it does. It saves into the sidecar file non-stop.
But is it non-stop? So that's going to be quite a lot of constant accessing the hard disk.
It's so minute, Carol, you would never even notice it.
I suppose it's no different to caching.
Yeah, it's just, you're talking about minute files. I mean, just have a quick look here, see if I can find them.
Yeah, it's only going to be the instructions to affect the picture.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't amount to that very much.
No. Hold on 1 second. I'm not actually sure where they are, to be honest, truth.
Oh, don't worry, they would be very small.
Yeah. And then when you finish, you can set up an automatic backup in the system as well. So when you set it up, I mean, I have it set up so that every week it backs up everything for me. And the only thing it's backing up is the catalog file. All right. So it's not backing up the original folders, it's just backing up the catalog file. And the catalog file contains all these sidecars. Okay. And it just does that every week. And, you know, I can always recover it if necessary, which is the great thing about it. So it works incredibly fast, incredibly well. I mean, obviously it depends on your computer. I mean, Ian and I have got M1 Macs, and they're pretty powerful. Well, they're not anywhere near the top of the range of the Macs. I don't know about your PC, Jeanette, or your PC, Carol, how powerful they are. But Lightroom works very, very well as a whole. So, you know, if you can run Photoshop, you can certainly run Lightroom without your problems. Photoshop is 10 times the load that Lightroom is.
My PC is 11 years old now, but I put SD drives in them and extra RAM and
yeah, that makes a big difference.
Multi-core, so it struggles a bit, but on the whole, it's still usable.
Yeah, we're using Photoshop, yeah.
Yeah, I use Photoshop, but of course I got Bridge with it, and Bridge on the face of it looks very similar in many ways.
Well, I mean, yeah, Bridge has got the cataloging.
Yeah, which I don't use anyway.
You know, you get Bridge with this anyway.
All
right, and I must admit, I started using Bridge, but I actually found in the end I didn't need it because everything I wanted was in here anyway. All right, I can get virtually anything I want in Bridge out of this section here. I can look at any of the metadata, I can look at all the information I need to look at, and it's all in one place. I don't need to go between two programs. So I've got, you know, effectively my cataloging. I've got all my corrections, and I've got all my filtering all built into one place, and it works very well for me. It is, I mean, there's a reason I think that it's the single most popular photo editing package out there, is because it works, and it works very simply, and it works very effectively. It's also interesting just how fast Adobe are updating it. This year, so in July, there's probably been 4 or 5 updates in the last 6 months. And they're just bringing new things all the time. If you're on the subscription module, which is I think $9.99 a month, and that includes Bridge, Lightroom, and Photoshop, you obviously get all the upgrades as they're released. So it works out very well. I mean, I've been using.
So you get Photoshop as well for that. So for $9.99, you get the generative fill.
You absolutely do. No, yes, you can. Absolutely, you can.
That to me, that was the most amazing bit of what we've seen.
Oh, generative fill is wonderful. It's wonderful. Well, it's not in the current release of Photoshop. Okay, but it's what's known as the Photoshop beta. But if you subscribe to the plan, you can download the Photoshop beta and run both. So I have got Photoshop latest version and Photoshop beta on my machine.
For $9.99?
And $9.99 a month, yeah.
Gosh, okay. That sounds